This is Tim.
And this is Adam.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo, Adam in Nagoya, not Melbourne. Nagoya. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I wish I was in Melbourne right now. It's pretty cold here in Nagoya, so.
Yeah, it's steaming hot down there.
Yeah. I don't know which is better, but yeah.
Well, yeah, it's funny because I think when I was like a teenager, for some reason I kind of liked winter better, and now I hate winter. And I'm in a place where we hardly even have any snow. It's just I hate the cold weather. I'd rather that it be sizzling hot outside.
I think it might be better if there were snow, because then at least it's like cold with a purpose. Whereas here, in Nagoya, it just gets cold, but it's a meaningless kind of cold. So, but
yeah.
But I've so far been able to avoid any of the various viruses that are going around. So, knock on wood.
Yeah, this recording got postponed a week because I had influenza last week.
And I didn't want to catch it through the microphone. So.
Right, yeah. Skype is a good way to catch sickness. So, all right. So, we were sent this comic from Henry Goeldner, who's an Australian writer. He says he found out about the podcast through Blue Sky, and he sent us the first volume of his comic, The Star-Tide Shores, illustration by Illuminated, which is the pen name of a guy whose name I'm going to mispronounce probably, Livio Braghio, Italian. And so this comic is, I don't know, I felt like I wanted to call it an R-rated Star Wars.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting that. When I first started reading it, I thought there were definitely some Star Wars vibes coming off of it, but I'm not sure now, having gone through the whole book, it might just be that because it is a space opera, that there's the same similar kind of tropes, because it doesn't actually read as very Star Wars-y.
No, it's not. It's a different tone.
And that might be what you mean when you say it's R-rated, yeah.
Yeah, the setting feels very familiar, but yeah, it's not the same tone as Star Wars. And it has F-bombs and it has blood. No sex that I saw, but...
Yeah. But there's, I think, for example, the main... I don't know if she's the main character, but the captain... I'm trying to remember the name now.
Or what? Elise Faulkner?
Yeah, Faulkner. Captain Elise Faulkner.
Kind of a mercenary.
Exactly. So she's sort of the Han Solo type character, right? Like the rough and tumble character. So I do feel like there are similar tropes, or not even tropes, but like similar type of archetypes in the characters, which is, maybe that's just how science fiction is. Science fiction tends to be somewhat formulaic, and then you have the world building and all of the other stuff that kind of differentiates them.
One big difference between this and Star Wars, no droids.
That's true. It's true. Although
all biological beings.
Right away on maybe the first page, you do see the father, the sickly king. I think that's the sickly king, right? And he looks like that part is what made me think it was a Star Wars type of thing, because he looks like a sick Darth Vader or something, like he's breathing from machines or something. Do you see what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, in that second panel.
Right.
He doesn't say anything.
Exactly, but he's hooked up to all these like wires and things like that, and I thought it was almost like the later Star Wars films where they show him sort of becoming Darth Vader, where he's been in this terrible accident and stuff like that. It sort of reminded me of that, the way he's sickly and with all these electrodes and stuff, but he's obviously not acting very Vader-esque, but
no, he's said to be on his deathbed, basically.
Yeah. So I agree that it has a sort of a Star Wars flavor as far as the setting. It's actually a bit more, there's a lot of political intrigue and things like that. So it's actually almost sort of like a Game of Thrones kind of thing almost, with family infighting and things like that.
Right. And Elise Faulkner, this mercenary, is hired to protect a prince because the prince's brother wants to kill him and take over the throne when their father dies. The custom is to kill and eat their rivals.
Yes, as you do.
So, right, yeah. So the prince is on the menu.
And I think he's already eaten most of his other brothers at this point.
Yeah,
right?
he mentions that he has killed his other siblings. And yeah, and of course there are some twists along the way. I thought it was an interesting story, and I liked the art, but there were some pages where I wasn't quite sure what was happening.
Towards the end, is that where you got...
I got kind of lost going into the finale there.
Yeah, it seems to me that the artist is intentionally trying to speed up the pace of the story by putting these kind of fast, wordless panels. But you're right, it does... You sort of get confused about what exactly is happening, especially as it's in that kind of final scene where they're blowing up the meeting point or whatever it is. I don't want to totally ruin things here, spoil things, but I felt the same way. And you do see a clock, a watch that's sort of counting down, so you know that these are happening in the span of a few seconds, these kind of quick action things. So,
right, that's the bomb that she sets a few pages earlier.
Right, exactly. So I did find, though, after you come through that scene, when you're on the other side of it, it didn't really matter if you understood it or not, because you sort of, it tells you exactly what you were supposed to take away from it. So it wasn't a big drawback for me.
Yeah, it's true. The last scene is like, okay, I see what happened. I understand how it ended. So that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and so I'm sure we'll get to talking about the story in a moment. So I guess we can stick to the art. But I find the art to be the colors are really, they're kind of flat, and I like it. I mean that in a very good way. They're not, it's not lots of gradients. It's a lot of kind of cool tones. There is a bit of a gradient, just kind of shading, but it's not like these really bright, colorful kind of gradients. And I feel like the panels are really well blocked out. You see a good composition throughout them, like page composition, but also composition of the shots in each panel. There are a few places where the way the panels are drawn on the page, it's very unconventional, kind of interesting shapes and things like that occasionally makes it difficult to know where your eye goes. But for the most part, I find it really, really easy to read. It was a breeze to get through this. And I think the art was very professional looking. I could imagine this being a book for Image or Dark Horse or somebody like that, kind of a second tier publisher or something.
Yeah. For sure.
And I will say, I really like the character designs. When it first opened up and you see these kind of lizard people, they reminded me a lot of the Jim Henson characters from things like The Dark Crystal or something like that. Like they have a very unique kind of look to them. They're not just simply like lizard people. They're kind of, that's just the quickest description for them, but they look kind of unique. And then there's some bounty hunters later on that, like, one looks like he's basically Guts with teeth and a hat. It's an interesting kind of look. Like each character has a very unique design.
Yeah, you're never going to get confused, like, which character is this? It's
Exactly. Yeah. It actually, that aspect of it somewhat reminded me of, what was the name of that book where it was really popular a few years ago with, I really should have prepared more for this, because there is something that it reminded me specifically of, and I can't remember the name of the book, but it was basically, I can't even describe it really because it's so weird. But it had all kinds of really weird characters that just pop in, like people with TV heads and like cat bodies and stuff like that. And it was very, it was a very unique art look. And I think that this has somewhat of a influence from that.
Are you thinking of Saga?
Yes, I am thinking of Saga. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah. So forget everything I said and just erase that. I said Saga. And yeah, there is a bit of that because each character is so uniquely of its own kind of thing. So that reminded me of Saga. But yeah, it's very, very accomplished art. And there aren't like the panels are very seamlessly kind of put together. There aren't like these hard borders and stuff like that. I mean, like thick borders that kind of block it all off. It's all kind of put together really well. So yeah, hats off to the artist for this. It's a very, very nice looking book. I will say this though, the cover, this is actually my one bit of constructive criticism is that the cover does not do justice to the rest of the art in the book. When you sent the file to me and that all I saw was the cover, I honestly wasn't that interested in reading it. And then when I saw the very first page, I thought, oh, this looks really good. So I don't know if it's too late or not, but I would say that the cover needs kind of reconsideration because it doesn't draw you in and it doesn't let you know how good the art's going to be. It's kind of a simple cover.
I agree. I think subconsciously, I felt like the comic had to kind of win me back after the cover didn't really do anything for me. And I got it kind of lowered my expectations. And then I got in like, oh yeah, this is actually pretty good.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's the cover is very simple. It's just kind of the main characters, but there's like a kind of a like outline around them to kind of keep them from the background. And then the typography is not that eye-catching. And the background is not really, eye-catching either. So I would say that the cover needs some reconsideration, perhaps, because it is a really nice, pretty book, and I think the potential readers should see that from the get-go.
About the writing, I thought he was good at giving the book some depth, so it wasn't just like event. But there were some deeper bits, like when the prince sees a bunch of people who have been killed in the castle, and he notices that a couple of them were just gardeners, or other places where the prince has to just kind of stop and take a moment and deal with all the trauma that's been going on, and in Star Wars, that never happened.
Exactly. Yeah.
Really. I mean, the princess gets angry, but there weren't ever any moments I can recall as like, oh boy, this is a bunch of crap, and how am I going to deal with this? And people just kind of deal with stuff in Star Wars. But
yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And I agree. There are moments where it takes you out of kind of the main action and makes you consider what's really going on and the implications of it, but it doesn't ever take you out of the story entirely. But there are a few moments like that where I felt like it, as I agree with you 100%, it adds depth to the story overall. And none of the characters are two-dimensional. They all have their own stuff going on. This prince is probably the best of his family, but he's not, you don't really know necessarily if he's a good person or a bad person. The Elise Faulkner kind of makes it seem like anybody with power is going to be bad and all emperors are bad, right? So he's going to be bad. But comparing to his brother, I mean, his brother is absolutely, irredeemable, awful person. So yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot of depth to all the different characters. The person who comes in and pretends to be his guardian and trying to, hire this bounty hunter to save the prince in the first place actually ends up being part of they call it a company, I guess, and maybe another race that's competing with them or something, I assume.
Yeah, they needed to explain a little better what the company was. Was it like organized crime or what? I was a little puzzled there.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but it seems like he's in cahoots with these kind of moth-looking people, so I don't know. And they do make a reference, she says if he goes with the company guy, that they will keep him in a cage, basically a gilded cage as a symbol or something like that. Mm-hmm. And there's a scene where his brother is talking about the same thing and sort of condemning his father for taking that path. So you do get this impression, or at least I did, that there's kind of two big factions fighting for control, and that the way that I interpreted it is that these lizard people sort of are trying to regain their control over the galaxy or the area or whatever, and that the old king was kind of a weakling and didn't do that. And so he's trying to restore the family glory, the brother is, by consolidating power and things like that. That's the impression I got. Maybe I'm reading more into it than it was there.
So, well, anybody who wants to be king, they think they're going to do a better job than everybody else. But
yeah, exactly.
Or maybe just a better job of enriching themselves. Could be
right, and then making people believe that that's going to be good for them in the future or something like that. I mean, we have something like that currently going on.
Yeah, I can't imagine what you're thinking of, but anyway. So this was pretty good, and I should mention that in March they're planning a Kickstarter for the second volume. Okay,
so that might explain a bit more about these different factions and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, I will say about the writing, my take on the writing was that, it is an interesting story, the intrigue and all of that stuff going on, and the plot twists and things. But more than all of that, I was actually interested in the dialogue. The dialogue is interesting and sort of funny, and it's well written. There's a scene that really caught my attention in the beginning where when they first come to the bounty hunter and she says, "Don't talk or else this hangover will be your problem as well." That's a really, really well-crafted line, I thought. So So I'm impressed. I'm impressed with the writing, and I'm impressed with the art. I did feel, even before I got to the last page and read about the artists and the writers and stuff, I did feel this is probably written by an Australian, and I don't know why. I'm not sure what it was. Something about it felt Australian to me.
Your Aussie sense was tingling.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Maybe there were some Aussieisms buried in the dialogue that you subconsciously noticed. Nobody called anybody else mate or anything obvious like that, but
there is one scene where they do say mate, I think, but that could be British English, it could be a New Zealand English, it could be basically anywhere that's not North America. But for some reason, I pinned it as Australian. So, but yeah, I would recommend this book without any hesitation to a lot of people.
Sure.
If it's a fun sci-fi jaunt. It's not, at this point in the story, it's nothing super, deep and like head scratching or anything like that. It's just a kind of a fun, straightforward sci-fi story, and it's fun. It has a lot of interesting characters who are very fully fleshed out, and I do feel confident that the next books will be interesting and keep that pace, which I don't always feel about the books that we read on this show. Some of them I feel like, oh, maybe they'll get there
by volume 5.
Yeah, exactly, somewhere along the line. And other ones I feel like, oh, they might be losing the plot by book 2. But this one I have a feeling that it's pretty well thought out beforehand. So.
Yeah. So, yeah, this was good. And I think there's something or other I can link to in the show notes so people can take a look at some of the art.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of Critiquing Comics. Support all our work at patreon.com/deconcomics. Deconstructing Comics is back on Wednesday with part 2 of our discussion of the 2005 Fantastic Four movie. See you then.